guys? I just watched the movie Cimarron. It was the 1931 Best Picture of the Year. It also won Best Writing of an Adaptation. The person who adapted the script was Howard Estabrook, based on the novel by Edna Ferber. It also won Best Art Direction. The person who did that was Max Ray. It was also nominated for Best Director, Wesley Ruggles, lost to Norman Taurog for Skippy. Nominated for Best Actor, Richard Dix for his role as Yancey Cravat, losing to Lionel Barrymore as Stephen Ash in A Free Soul. Best Actress nominee, Irene Dunne played Sabre Cravat, lost to Marie Dressler in Min and Bill as Min DeVoe. And Best Cinematography, which was done by Edward Cronhager, losing to Floyd Crosby for Taboo, A Story of the South Seas. The first movie, along with A Free Soul, to be nominated in both lead acting categories. This movie became the first movie to receive 7 nominations, which was a record for its time, beating the previous record, which was 6, held by the movie The Love Parade, which, as a result, didn't win anything. And it was also the first movie to tie for the record number of wins at the time, which was 3. The other 2 movies that held that were Seventh Heaven and Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans, which were both from the first ceremony. And now for the story. It starts off in 1889, so there was this great land rush where a bunch of people are racing to stake their claim to a bunch of land that they feel belongs to them. And this land was known as the Cimarron territory, which was former Indian land. And the Cimarron territory is now known as the Panhandle of Oklahoma. You know, that skinny part of Oklahoma. The movie follows a family known as the Cravats, led by an ambitious patriarch named Yancey, who decided to take his wife Sabra and his young son Sim to make a living in this land. They landed in the town of Osage. This town will grow over the course of the next 40 years, but in the meantime, Yancey becomes a quickly respected and admired person of leadership for this town, as he runs the local newspaper. But as the next land rush takes place in the Cherokee lands, Yancey decides to abandon his family to join on this adventure, leaving his wife and his son and daughter now to kind of live on their own, and forcing his wife to develop a state of true grit, a sense of independence, as she will run the newspaper herself. This movie had a lot of flaws. This movie had lots of flaws. Let's start off with the racial stereotyping. There's a character in the movie by the name of Isaiah, played by Eugene Jackson. He's a servant for Sabra's family. Now, Sabra's family's kind of wealthy. He comes off as kind of foolish and naive. He eventually stows away in the Cravat's wagon as they take off for Osage. They find him in there, and he begs to stay and help them out and sort of be a hired servant, which they said, okay, all right, we'll do that. I was going to let that slide, and then they enter the town of Osage, of which Yancey talks to Isaiah as they're passing by a basket full of watermelons. And he says, "Hey, that's an awful lot of watermelon there, Isaiah." And Isaiah says, "Oh, yes, sir. I'm so happy to be in Oklahoma." That didn't quite sit well with me. And I imagine if you're a person that's sensitive to that kind of racial stereotyping, that probably wouldn't sit well with you either. But then the racial stereotyping kind of eventually stops, and then it just becomes racial mistreatment of a character. In this big shootout that happens in the town, there's like a bunch of bandits that come to Osage. So Yancey, being the big sort of pre-John Wayne hero that he is of a character, he goes out to thwart the shooters and the bandits and such. Sabra, his wife, is hiding in the house and asks Isaiah to locate her son, who's outside somewhere. He eventually does, but he doesn't get there in time to actually go up to the kid and say, "Hey, you gotta get the hell out of here," because he gets shot. And if you think that is bad, it gets even worse. After Yancey wins the shootout, and if you think I'm spoiling it, I'm not. We're only halfway through the movie. After Yancey defeats all the shooters and stuff, because he's that kind of guy, he walks back to his house. as he's walking past, here's Isaiah. He's on the ground, slightly hidden by barrels, but he's still crying out for help. His dying cries. He goes, Master Yancey, Master Yancey. Yancey doesn't hear a thing. Just keeps walking. Keeps walking back to his house, and then he runs into his wife. His wife is like, "Oh, you shouldn't have done that. You could have been killed." "Oh, I only did that so you wouldn't be killed, sweetheart," and such and such. And they forget about Isaiah for like the next 5 minutes. In fact, they don't even remember it on their own. It's not until one of the townsfolk walks in holding his body. That's when the couple and the rest of us, the audience, is like, "Oh yeah, that's right, we are supposed to care about that character, I guess." So they go, and it's like, "Oh, boo-hoo, boo-hoo," for the next 30 seconds, and then the scene transitions 3 years later to where we don't have to care about that black kid anymore. I feel like it would have been better for this movie of this era if they didn't have a black character than to have one and make him a very secondary person, as they did here. Almost comic relief to the... And so there's that. Another part of the racial stereotyping is, it's not really racial stereotyping, it's just that the female lead, Sabra, played by Irene Dunn, is bigoted towards Native Americans. It comes to a big fold when she finds out that her son plans to marry one of them. But she eventually is okay with it once she finds out that her husband's okay with it too, because her husband is not only charismatic and admired in the community, he's also quite liberal and progressive, I guess. But let's just say we leave the racism out of it. Let's just say that wasn't in the movie. Let's just pretend there was no racial stereotyping or no racial prejudice involved with the making of this movie. What is there to criticize? Actually, let's start with what is there to praise. Let's start with the opening scene. The opening scene's pretty cool. It demonstrates the actual land race. A bunch of wagons and a bunch of horses are lined up to participate in this race. And they don't just show them up close to where you think there's a lot. No, there's actually exterior shots that hold from far away that shows this big lineup of carriages and wagons and horses and people. This is 1931. They didn't have computers or green screen to do that. They actually had to have actual people and horses. So I thought that piece of filmmaking was pretty amazing. We eventually get to the town of Osage. Actually it's a small town, but there's a lot of people, great art direction, and the art direction shows as the fast forward certain number of years, you see the town evolving, getting bigger. The first half of the movie is where it's good. It's pretty good all the way up to that shootout scene. Then after that, it starts getting messy in the plot and the narrative. Because then, you like the character of Yancey at first, but to the audience, he eventually becomes a bit of a because that whole thing about, oh, the Cherokee lands are open. Oh, honey, I gotta be involved in that adventure. I'm just gonna abandon you. I mean, I'll come back, but I'm gonna leave you alone without any real warning. I'm just gonna leave on the spot. And get this, he doesn't come back until 5 years later. After all the rumors are being spread about him, he comes back, apparently a glorified war hero. After fighting in the Spanish-American War. And, what makes it even worse is that his wife is like, oh, you can't come back all these years and just let me expect you. But she does. She accepts him. She's like, okay with it. Everyone is pretty much okay with him coming back without warning, after leaving without warning. And over time, it eventually shows that he presumably takes off again, and everyone's okay with it. After that, you start seeing a bunch of little self-contained stories happening in these scenes. The narrative and the plot gets really rocky. To the point where, if you're watching this movie, after the shootout scene, after the whole scene where they're mourning over Isaiah, the young boy servant, stop watching it. I feel like the writers didn't care anymore after this movie. After when they were coming to the end of writing this movie, I don't think they cared anymore. Especially after the last scene. I'm not gonna spoil it, but it was pretty bad. It was very bad. It was very cliche, and it was supposed to be. I'm just gonna say it was supposed to be a tragic ending, but the way they made it, it's like, oh, it's not sad. It's happy in the overall run. It was a mess. Here's how you sum up the movie's problems. 1. It tries to be a big Western epic, but fails in its narrative, leaving more loose ends and plot holes than the series finale of Lost. 2. It thinks it has good character development, but it really doesn't. You think the main two characters are changing, or it tries to make you think that, but overall, they don't really change that much. The only thing that changes about the characters is Sabra, who is not bigoted towards Native Americans anymore. Okay, whoop-de-doo. Anything else? Oh, she's supposedly stronger, but she's still gonna bend backwards over heels when her husband finally returns. That's where we get to the third one. The main characters begin to sour badly on you as the movie progresses. The best way I can sum it up in a positive way is that it's a hell of a lot better than In Old Arizona, which was a Best Picture nominee in 1929 for the second ceremony. This movie proves that Hollywood knows how to make a Western. They just didn't write it that well. And that's why I agree with many lists to say this is an undeserving Best Picture winner. In comparison, Skippy was a better movie. So that's why I'm going to give this 2 stars out of 4. It's a watchable Western. Up to a certain point, it's not that good. It didn't deserve to win Best Picture. It had cool art direction, it had cool costumes, cast was okay, I guess. It's a very imperfect film. And I don't understand why it won Best Picture. Well, actually, I know why it won Best Picture. It was exciting to the dim-witted, and it didn't have a little kid be its star. 2 stars is the best I can give this movie. I wanted to give it 3, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. It wasn't good enough to get 3 stars. It's a 2-star movie. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you next time.